For 3 months after their marriage, the Mafia boss ignored her until one night her selfie. Hey, beautiful souls, it's Selena James here. Whether you've been with me from the very beginning or you just stumbled into our little corner of stories tonight, I'm so grateful you're here. This space isn't just about love and danger or darkness and desire. It's about feeling. It's about hearts that break, heal, and still believe again. So take a breath, my loves. Leave the noise outside. You're safe here. You're seen here. And tonight, I promise, I'll tell you a story that will make your heart ache and bloom all at once. The mansion breathed like something ancient, each corridor inhaling silence and exhaling a chill that crawled beneath Alara Conti's skin, reminding her she did not belong to herself anymore, only to the marble walls that glittered with other people's power, and to the name she now carried like a wound, Rossi. Every step she took sounded too loud, too alive, a trespass inside a house that had forgotten what warmth felt like. Chandeliers hung above her head like frozen constellations, catching the faintest glint of her reflection as she passed, but even her own image seemed reluctant to look back. She had been married for 92 days. She knew because she counted them by the flowers that wilted and were replaced in the vases each morning. 92 days since she had stood in front of Valerio Rossi, the man they called the Ghost, and promised vows that had already felt like smoke on her tongue. He had not touched her since. He did not speak unless it was an order. The staff lowered their eyes when she entered a room, afraid that her presence might anger him, as though silence itself were contagious. She remembered being a teacher once, the feel of chalk dust soft between her fingers, the laughter of children painting afternoons into something bright and ordinary. Here, in this house of shadows, her laughter would sound wrong, almost blasphemous. She had tried at first to fill the emptiness with purpose, reading books, watering the same row of lilies outside her window, learning the footsteps of the men who guarded the gates, yet nothing could fill the hollow space where her husband's voice should have lived. Sometimes she heard him at night, pacing in the study across the hall, the faint scrape of a lighter flicking open and shut, a rhythm that replaced conversation. She imagined his face lit by the brief flare of flame, eyes sharp as broken glass, jaw locked as if he were biting back words that might destroy them both. When she gathered courage to knock on his door, no answer came. The next morning, a servant would inform her that the Don had left early for business. Business, such a small word for the kind of darkness that kept men awake until dawn. She told herself it did not matter, that she had chosen this life to protect her mother, to ensure her family's debts vanished into the Rossi vaults. But at night, when the wind pressed against the windows and the city beyond the gates whispered like a faraway promise, she wondered if protection was worth the slow suffocation of being unseen. The house itself seemed to watch her. She could feel its gaze following her from room to room, as if the portraits of past Rossis whispered warnings behind her back. Their painted eyes gleamed with contempt for the woman who had dared to step inside their bloodline. She walked through the grand dining hall, her reflection stretching across the long, black glass table that had not seen more than one place setting in months. Valerio ate there sometimes, late at night, his plate already waiting when she descended the stairs, hoping to join him. By the time she reached the bottom, the chair was empty again, the air still heavy with his cologne. She would touch the rim of his glass, still warm from his hand, and feel an ache so sharp it almost seemed physical. She left small traces for him, a folded napkin, a cup of coffee, a note written in careful ink, but they disappeared before morning. Once, she found her handwriting burnt to ash in the study's fireplace, a curl of smoke rising like the ghost of her own voice. She did not cry. Instead, she pressed her palm against the cold marble mantel and whispered to the silence, "If you must erase me, do it quickly." The flames answered with a sigh. Days turned into replicas of one another, polished, and lifeless. She learned the patterns of the guards' shifts, the exact time the kitchen lights dimmed, the sequence of clicks from the security panels hidden behind the library shelves. She had never seen so many locks in one home. It was as if Valerio wanted to keep the world out, and her in. Sometimes, in the reflection of a window, she saw movement behind her, a shape vanishing just as she turned. She told herself it was imagination, but every night the hair on her arms lifted when the air cooled suddenly, like the passing of a spirit. She began to talk to herself quietly, so the silence wouldn't win. Her own voice sounded strange, softer, foreign, like she was speaking from underwater. In those moments she missed her mother with a pain that bent her ribs inward. Gabriella had warned her, "Love that begins in fear will end in ruin." But it wasn't fear that had brought her here. It was necessity, and maybe a foolish belief that she could thaw the heart of a man who'd forgotten how to be human. She remembered their wedding night, Valerio standing at the window, city lights flickering across his face, while she sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the gown that felt like armor. He had said only one thing before leaving the room: "Sleep. Tomorrow begins your silence." Since then, she obeyed because rebellion seemed pointless in a kingdom ruled by ghosts. Still, the human heart has a cruel way of hoping even when logic forbids it. One evening, she saw him in the courtyard, talking to his brother Lorenzo. The wind carried fragments of their conversation. "She'll leave if you keep this up." "Let her." The words sliced through her like winter glass. Yet she couldn't look away. Valerio's posture was rigid, his hands clenched behind his back as if he were holding something fragile enough to shatter. When he glanced toward the window, her breath caught, but his gaze slid past her like a blade. Later that night, she dreamt of fire, of letters burning, of red dresses and open doors. When she awoke, the dream lingered in the smell of smoke. She sat before the mirror, tracing the curve of her own face, wondering what it was about her that repelled him so completely. Beauty was a burden here, softness, a liability. She had been told the Rossi men valued obedience more than affection. Yet something about Valerio's distance felt less like cruelty and more like punishment. Perhaps not for her, but for himself. She had once seen him return from a meeting, blood splattered across his cuffs, expression unreadable. He passed her in the hall without a word, yet his sleeve brushed her wrist for the briefest moment, and that contact set every nerve in her body alight. He didn't look back. Neither did she. But the memory of that accidental touch haunted her for days, proof that he was still flesh beneath all that cold. The servants spoke of him in whispers, calling him a ghost, not only because he made his enemies disappear, but because he existed in the world as something half living, half legend. She wondered if anyone had ever truly seen him, or if even he had forgotten what his own humanity looked like. The thought frightened her, and inexplicably drew her closer. Alara moved through the house like a ghost haunting her own life, a quiet rhythm between corridors and memories. Days blurred into each other, a tapestry of muted colors and unfinished thoughts. Every morning began with the same hollow ritual: tea poured into porcelain she never drank from, breakfast laid out in silence, footsteps echoing on marble. She'd begun to wonder if sound itself feared this place. The mansion devoured noise. Even the clocks seemed to tick softer here, as though time had learned to tiptoe around the dawn's solitude. She often wandered to the west balcony, the one that overlooked the gardens, where roses grew in perfect lifeless rows. Their petals were flawless but carried no scent, just as her life looked beautiful but smelled faintly of despair. Shy, he would trace her fingers along the cold railing and imagine the world beyond the gates, a world where laughter still belonged to her, where her name wasn't whispered like a warning. Somewhere her mother's voice existed, soft and strong, reminding her of mornings when the light through the kitchen window turned everything gold. But those memories felt borrowed now, belonging to a woman who no longer existed. The silence of the mansion had remade her into something else, quieter, sharper, waiting. She began to notice details others missed. The way the air shifted whenever Valerio was near, the faint smell of tobacco that always arrived before he did, the slight hum of electricity behind certain walls. She followed that hum once, pressing her ear to the wallpaper near her dressing mirror. Beneath the polished surface, she heard a faint mechanical pulse, steady and deliberate. It reminded her of a heartbeat, only colder. The thought unsettled her, yet she dismissed it as imagination. Until one evening, while brushing her hair before the mirror, she saw movement in its reflection, not behind her, but within the glass itself, a flicker that shouldn't have been there. She turned quickly, finding only the stillness of her room staring back. But her pulse refused to slow. She walked toward the mirror, closer, until her breath fogged its surface, and for a moment, her reflection seemed to waver, like the house itself was holding its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed. Not slammed, not loud, but final. She whispered his name before she could stop herself. Valerio. The word broke the silence like a secret. She waited, foolishly hoping he might answer, but the air gave nothing back. So she began to write again, small fragments on scraps of paper torn from an old notebook she'd found in the library. I am still here. You don't have to look at me. Just see me. She left them where he couldn't ignore them, on his desk, near the coffee tray, even on the steering wheel of his car. But as always, they vanished, devoured by the same void that consumed everything she offered him. Her frustration bloomed quietly, a seed of rebellion in the soil of her despair. One night, she decided to do something she hadn't done since the wedding. She entered his study. The door wasn't locked. The room was cold, cleaner than she expected, every book and paper aligned with military precision. His presence lingered, faint but potent. Leather, smoke, and danger. The fireplace was dead, but a trace of ash clung to the grate. When she crouched, she found the charred edge of one of her letters, her own handwriting blackened and curling. For a long moment she couldn't breathe. The realization struck hard. He hadn't ignored her words, he'd destroyed them. That was worse. Indifference she could survive. Erasure was something else. She stood, her reflection catching in the glass cabinet beside the desk. Eyes darker than she remembered, posture straighter, something new hardening in her chest. She was done being invisible. When she returned to her room, she felt the house watching again. The corridors seemed narrower, the shadows thicker. She heard a faint hum behind her, like electricity running through veins in the walls. She turned sharply. Nothing. But the feeling persisted, the certainty that she wasn't alone. She sat at her vanity, brushing her hair with slow, mechanical strokes, the sound of the bristles steady and deliberate. It was only when she set the brush down that she saw it, a small red blink at the corner of the mirror. Once, twice, steady. Her first thought was reflection, some trick of light from the hallway. But as she leaned closer, the blinking intensified. Her skin prickled. She pressed her palm against the mirror, and the light responded, a soft pulse beneath the glass. Not a reflection, a signal, a lens, a camera. The breath left her body in fragments. She stepped back, scanning the room. Another blink, this one near the Pani Salle chandelier. Then another, hidden near the bookshelf. Her gaze darted to the corner above the door, where the faintest glint of metal caught the lamplight. 4 red eyes watched her. They had always been watching. Her stomach turned cold. She remembered the faint hum, the feeling of being seen, the movement in the reflection. It had never been her imagination. Someone had been observing her every move, every tear, every word she whispered to herself in the dark. And in that instant, she understood the kind of cage she truly lived in, not built of gold, but of eyes. The Rossi mansion was not a home. It was a prison disguised as a palace, and the walls had been recording her grief. She staggered toward the door, hand trembling on the knob, but froze when she heard it, a sound so soft it barely existed. A breath, just beyond the door, slow, steady, human. Someone was standing there, listening, watching, waiting. She swallowed, her pulse thundering in her ears, every instinct screaming to run, to hide, to scream. But she did none of those things. She stood perfectly still, her reflection trembling behind her, and whispered into the silence, "Who's there?" The hallway didn't answer, but the breath on the other side deepened, a quiet exhale that was almost a sigh, and she knew, without opening the door, without needing proof, who it belonged to. Valerio. The red lights blinked once more, in unison, before fading to black, and from the darkness beyond the door came the unmistakable sound of a lighter flicking open. Morning arrived like a stranger who had forgotten her name. The mansion breathed in low hums and mechanical whispers, the kind of silence that was never truly empty. Alara woke with her pulse still trembling from the night before, from the moment she had seen that small, blinking red eye staring at her from the corner of her room. It wasn't just the camera she remembered. It was the pause in the air before she closed her eyes, the feeling that someone was still there beyond the wall, watching her even when the light was gone. The room felt colder now, the sheets heavy with unsaid things. She rose quietly, the marble floor freezing her bare feet, and stood in front of the mirror, where her reflection looked both too real and not real enough. She traced her fingertips along the gilded frame and noticed it. The faintest click beneath the glass, the tiniest shadow of a lens buried behind the silvering. Her stomach twisted. Behind her, the curtains breathed in the draft like they, too, were listening. The mansion was not a home. It was a mouth that swallowed secrets and exhaled surveillance. She thought of the fireplace, of the note she had written and watched burn, wondering if even the flames had been recorded. She tore the mirror from the wall. It cracked against the marble, scattering her reflection into a dozen trembling pieces. From the shards, her own eyes stared back, fragmented, defiant, terrified, and behind them, the small black eye of the hidden camera blinked once, then died. Her breath hitched, her hands shook as she picked up the lens and dropped it into a glass of water. It fizzed softly, dying like a drowning insect. She wanted to scream, but the house was not a place where voices survived. Somewhere beyond the corridor, the sound of footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, like the march of something inevitable. Valerio Rossi. He entered the room like a ghost returning to his own haunt. The morning light clung to him reluctantly, refusing to soften the sharpness of his suit, the cut of his jaw, the glacial precision of his eyes. He looked at the broken mirror, then at her, and for a moment, something unreadable flickered behind his expression. He stepped closer, the faint scent of gun oil and expensive smoke trailing after him. "You think I don't see you?" His voice was calm, but it carried the kind of cold that could shatter glass. "Every breath you take in this house, I know it." Alara's throat tightened. "That's not seeing," she whispered. "That's prison." His jaw flexed, a tremor behind the mask. "You think freedom exists for people like us?" he asked, almost quietly. "Out there, you'd last a day before someone tried to use you against me. Here, at least, you're safe." Safe. The word landed like a blade. Alara lifted her chin, the shards of mirror glittering between them like scattered promises. Safe doesn't mean alive. For a second, his composure cracked. He looked at her as if she had reached into his chest and touched something he'd buried deep, a wound, or maybe a longing, but then it was gone. "You don't understand this world," he said, turning away, his reflection breaking across the fractured glass. "You don't understand what happens when love becomes a weapon." And with that, he left. The echo of his footsteps faded, but the chill of his presence lingered like smoke that refused to dissipate. The day dragged on in stillness. Alara wandered through the endless halls, each room echoing with secrets. In the study, she found another camera hidden inside the face of a grandfather clock. Its pendulum swung like a heartbeat she didn't own. In the hallway, behind a portrait of a woman whose painted smile was heartbreakingly familiar, Isabella Rossi, another lens glowed faintly. Her skin crawled. Every step she took was catalogued, recorded, consumed. She began to whisper to herself just to feel human, muttering words no one could hear over the low hum of surveillance. The mansion was alive, and she was its pulse. When dusk fell, she went to the balcony for air. The city stretched below like a kingdom she had no power over. The wind touched her hair, carried the faint scent of rain and iron. She imagined what it would feel like to step beyond the gates, to feel the world's noise instead of this engineered silence. Somewhere inside, A door slammed, hard, deliberate. Her body froze. Then came the sound of his footsteps again, closer this time, heavier, as if they carried the weight of decision. Valerio appeared in the doorway, half in shadow, his tie loosened, his sleek isan vest rolled up, revealing forearms marked with faint scars. He said nothing at first. The tension between them was a living thing, raw, charged, dangerous. "Why destroy the cameras?" he asked finally. "Do you have something to hide?" Alara turned to face him. "Only my sanity," she said. "You already own everything else." His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something else. Something that looked like restraint, like pain. "You think I want this?" he murmured. "You think I enjoy watching you through a screen?" Her breath caught. "Then why do it?" He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking like a noose. "Because I can't stop," he whispered. "Because if I don't, I'll walk into this room and never walk out again." Her pulse fluttered. She didn't understand him, but she could feel the battle inside him, the war between desire and control, fear and hunger. She wanted to hate him, but part of her, some quiet, reckless part, ached to be seen, even through the eyes of her captor. He left her standing there again, the night folding around her like a secret. But as she turned to close her door, she saw it, his shadow, long and unmoving, still outside her room, watching, breathing, waiting. The night pressed close against the windows, wrapping the mansion in a silence too deep to trust. Alara sat at her vanity, brushing her hair with slow, distracted movements, every sweep of the brush a small act of defiance against the house that tried to erase her. The broken mirror from earlier had been replaced already, spotless, whole, and lifeless. The speed of its replacement chilled her. It meant someone had been watching the moment it fell. She stared into the new glass and saw not herself, but a reflection curated for someone else's eyes. Behind her, the faint hum of the mansion's electrical current whispered, like the heartbeat of a mechanical god. The hall beyond her doors. R creaked again, soft, deliberate, almost intimate. Valerio moved like smoke through the corridor, silent, but unmistakable. She could sense him before she saw him, the air itself tightening around his presence. She told herself not to look, not to give him power through acknowledgement, but her eyes betrayed her. Through the half-open door, she saw his silhouette, tall, motionless, framed by the dim golden light spilling from the wall sconces. He wasn't in a suit this time. His shirt was undone at the collar, his hair slightly disheveled, his face a portrait of exhaustion and restraint. For the first time, he looked less like the Don of the Rossi family and more like a man haunted by the empire he ruled. Alara set her brush down and turned her gaze toward the door. Her voice trembled, but it carried. "Are you going to stand there all night, Don Rossi?" His name came out sharper than she intended, a blade forged from fear and fury. He didn't move. The silence stretched so long she began to think he'd vanished again, the phantom he always was. But then his voice came, low, controlled, lethal in its calm. "You shouldn't break things that don't belong to you." Her heart slammed once against her ribs. "And I suppose that includes me?" she asked. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a flinch. He stepped inside, the shadows bending around him. "You're not a thing, Alara," he said quietly. "That's the problem." She rose from her chair slowly, her bare feet whispering against the marble. "Then stop treating me like one." The air between them crackled. He took another step closer, his eyes flickering between anger and longing, between the man he was trained to be and the man he could never admit to being. "You don't understand what you've done," he said, his voice roughening. "By breaking those cameras, you've made this place blind. You've made me blind, and blindness in our world is death." "Then maybe let it die," she said. "Maybe let this die." Something shattered in his expression, not visibly, but deep within. He took a breath like a man fighting for oxygen. The turned sharply toward the door. For a moment, she thought he would leave again, vanish into the dark corridors where he could be both ruler and ghost. But he didn't. He stopped at the threshold and said without turning, "You think I watch you to control you, But I watch you because if I don't, I'll forget how to be human." Then he was gone. Alara stood there long after he left, his words clinging to the air like smoke. Her heart was a riot of confusion, fear tangled with sympathy, anger knotted with something perilously close to understanding. She went to the window and looked down at the courtyard where the fountains shimmered under the moonlight. The world outside looked unreal, a painting trapped behind glass. Somewhere out there, people laughed, kissed, lived without being seen. She wondered if her mother still prayed for her, if Sophia still sent unanswered messages into the void. Time drifted like dust. Midnight came. The house slept, but Alara couldn't. Every creak of the wood, every hum of electricity felt amplified, invasive. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling where faint shadows danced from the flicker of the fireplace in the next room. Her mind replayed his words over and over. "If I don't watch you, I'll forget how to be human." What kind of confession was that? Pity disguised as control? Love poisoned by fear? Or something darker, something she couldn't name yet? A soft sound made her eyes snap open. The door, her door, had moved. Just an inch, enough for a thread of light to slip in. She held her breath. In the sliver between the door and the frame, she saw him again. Valerio, standing there, motionless, a silhouette cut from shadow and restraint. His hand rested against the door frame, his head bowed slightly, as if he was listening to the rhythm of her breath. The sight of him like that, silent, reverent, dangerous, sent a shiver down her spine that was half terror, half something she refused to name. She closed her eyes, pretending to sleep. The silence deepened until even the clock in the hall seemed afraid to tick. Then she heard it, his voice, barely above a whisper, raw and trembling with something too human to be safe. "If I touch you," he said, "I'll destroy you." The words hung in the dark, heavy and sacred, a confession and a curse. Outside her half-open door, Valerio's shadow lingered long after the whisper faded. Inside, Alara's eyes opened, wide, glistening, awake. And for the first time, she wasn't sure who was more dangerous, the ghost who watched her or the part of her heart that wanted him to stay. Morning came quietly, like a wound that refused to close. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, uncertain whether to mourn or to wait. Alara woke with the echo of his whisper still coiled around her mind. "If I touch you, I'll destroy you." The words haunted her as sunlight filtered through the tall curtains, cutting the room into gold and shadow. She didn't move at first. She lay still, listening to the faint sounds of the house, the maids sweeping floors below, the distant rumble of engines outside, the steady hum of a place that never truly slept. Every corner seemed to hum with the residue of his presence. Even in absence, Valerio lingered like smoke that refused to clear. By mid-morning, she found herself pacing. The unease in her body wasn't fear. It was something sharper, more alive. She had spent 3 months shrinking inside his silence, waiting for warmth that never came. But now, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at her the night before, like she was both temptation and ruin. Maybe it was the way his voice cracked around the edges when he said he'd destroy her. It wasn't love, she told herself. It couldn't be, but it was power, and she was done giving all of hers away. When the phone rang, she almost didn't answer. But the sound was human, real, something not born of the mansion's surveillance. She grabbed it like a lifeline. "Alara?" Sophia's voice spilled through. The receiver, warm and fiery, the one voice that didn't make her feel like she was disappearing. "Sophia," she breathed, closing her eyes. "You shouldn't call here." "You think I care about their rules?" Sophia scoffed. "You sound dead, Alara. I don't care if he's a don or a devil. You have to fight back. Make him see you." The words sank in. Make him see you. They pulsed through her like a heartbeat she'd forgotten she had. "He doesn't see anything," Alara whispered. "He watches, but he doesn't look." "Then make him look," Sophia said fiercely. "You taught children once, remember? You told them that silence is what gives cruelty power. Don't let him turn you into another Rossi ghost." Alara didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the wardrobe, to the rows of pale, elegant dresses chosen for her: ivory, beige, blush, soft colors, silent colors, the kind of shades that disappeared against marble walls. She walked toward it, pulled the doors open, and felt her chest tighten at the sight. Everything about this house was designed to erase her. Every stitch whispered obedience, but buried in the back, behind the tailored submission, she found it, a dress she hadn't worn since her wedding night. Red, forbidden. She pulled it free. The silk slid against her fingers like blood and rebellion. The house itself seemed to tense as she laid it on the bed, as though the walls were warning her. Rossi women don't wear red. She remembered hearing Chiara whisper it once, her tone full of disdain. Red was the color of defiance, of want, of sin. But Alara was past the point of caring. She spent the afternoon in silence, the kind that felt less like fear and more like preparation. Every movement she made felt deliberate. The soft clink of her perfume bottle, the sweep of her hairbrush, the careful painting of her lips in the same scarlet shade that burned through Valerio's restraint. And when she was done, she barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked dangerous, alive, the kind of woman who could make a ghost bleed. She picked up her phone, her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from something that felt disturbingly like exhilaration. The mansion was still, unaware of the rebellion unfolding inside its walls. She stood before the mirror, lifted the phone, and snapped a single photo. No filter, no smile, just her face, eyes filled with defiance, her mouth painted in crimson, the forbidden color burning across her body like a declaration. She stared at the photo for a long time. The image didn't lie. She didn't look like the forgotten wife of a mafia don. She looked like a challenge, like a fire waiting to consume everything that had kept her invisible. Without letting herself think twice, she sent it. To him. Valerio Rossi. The message was silent. No words, no explanation, just the image, just the war she had chosen to start. She watched the screen until it confirmed it had been delivered. Her heart hammered. Somewhere, miles away, that message would light up his phone. Somewhere, he would see what he had tried to bury. She left the phone on the vanity, turned away, and breathed. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. The mansion still watched, but now she was watching back. Far across the city, in a darkened restaurant that smelled of cigars and money, Valerio sat among men who feared him more than God. The table was long, the conversation sharp, the mood a battlefield in suits. He said little, his mind only half tethered to the moment. Power was his language, but tonight, even power felt dull. He was listening to the head of the Sicilian syndicate drone about supply routes when his phone, face down beside his glass, vibrated once. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. He glanced down. The screen lit up. One new message, no text, just a photo. Her photo, Alara. For a moment, he didn't breathe. The glass in his hand grew slick. The world around him blurred, voices fading into background noise. All he could see was her. Red dress, red lips, eyes that dared him to see her, to feel her, to remember she was more than his cage-bound wife. His jaw clenched, and something deep in him, something that had been caged for far too long, snapped its chain. His hand tightened, the glass shattered. Crimson wine spilled across his sleeve, dripping like blood. The table fell silent. Every man there turned toward him. The Don of the Rossi family, usually carved from stone, sat unmoving, staring at his phone like it held a bullet aimed straight at his heart. Don Rossi? One of the men ventured. He didn't answer. He stood, slowly, silently. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The doors slammed behind him, leaving silence in his wake. Back in the mansion, Alara sat alone, unaware that across the city, her message had detonated something dangerous inside the man who swore he could never love her. The phone on her vanity buzzed once, a single unread reply lighting the dark screen. But she didn't see it. And in the distance, engines roared toward home. The night arrived like a punishment. The city outside Valerio's car blurred into streaks of rain and neon, the world bending and breaking through the windshield as the engine screamed beneath his control. His hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to whiten his knuckles, veins rising against the pale of his skin. The shattered glass from the restaurant still clung to his sleeve, faint, glittering reminders of the moment his composure cracked. The moment she had shattered him. The photograph burned in his mind, relentless, unyielding. Elara in red, standing tall in defiance, her eyes piercing through every wall he had ever built. He had seen that color once before. Blood red, forbidden red. The color his father had banished from their lineage because it was the hue of feeling, of passion, of risk. Now it lived Ain, wrapped around his wife, a flame he could neither extinguish nor look away from. The driver's voice stammered something about the route, but Valerio didn't hear. His world had shrunk to the rhythm of the road and the echo of her eyes. He could still feel the burn of humiliation that had swept through that meeting, the shock in the faces of men who never dared question him. The dawn had flinched. The ghost had bled. And for what? A single image of a woman he had sworn not to love. He was supposed to be untouchable, unreadable, invincible, but she had found the crack in his armor with nothing but a look. Rain slicked the streets as he turned down the final road to the estate. His pulse thundered, a war drum against his ribs. Every passing streetlight carved the anger and longing deeper into his face. A man sculpted from contradiction, from hunger and denial. When the mansion came into view, it loomed like a cathedral of silence, its windows glowing faintly through the mist. He slowed, then stopped at the gates. The guards stepped back at the sight of him. His presence tonight was a storm, silent, seething, electric. He didn't wait for them to open the gate. He pressed the accelerator. The iron groaned and gave way. Inside, the house stirred. Servants froze in the halls. No one dared meet his eyes as he passed. His shoes left rain and broken glass on the marble, a trail of fury and purpose. Somewhere above, a door creaked, the faintest whisper of movement. Her movement. The world narrowed again to the rhythm of her presence. He could feel her even before he saw her, as if the house itself pulsed with her heartbeat. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his breath shallow, not from exhaustion, but from something else entirely. The edge between rage and longing, control and collapse. She was there. Elara stood by the window, her back to him, the moonlight kissing the curve of her shoulder. She wore the red dress, the same one from the photograph. In person, it was even more dangerous. The silk caught the faint shimmer of rain through the glass, the colocin, or deepening with every flicker of lightning outside. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, her bare feet pressed against the cold floor. She didn't turn when he entered. She didn't have to. The air itself changed when he crossed the threshold. He stopped. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was alive, sharp enough to cut. When she finally turned, her eyes found him with a calm that didn't match the storm in the room. "You came home," she said softly. He laughed, a short, broken sound. "You wanted to be seen, didn't you?" "I wanted to exist," she said. He took a slow step closer. His voice was low, the edge of something dark coiled beneath it. "Do you know what that photo did?" "Yes," her chin lifted. "It reminded you I'm not invisible." He moved again, closer now, his shadow falling over her. "It reminded every man in that room that I have something to lose." Elara's lips parted, but she didn't retreat. "Then maybe stop pretending you don't." The words hit him harder than any bullet. His breath caught. His eyes, pale, sharp, ghost-like, locked onto hers with something that looked like hunger and torment woven together. The storm outside echoed the one within him, thunder cracking against the glass. "You don't understand what you've done," he said, almost a whisper. "You've made me weak." "No," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I've made you real." He froze. The distance between them dissolved. Every muscle in him screamed to stay away, to remember his father's voice, the lessons carved into his bones. A Rossi doesn't love. Love is a weapon. Love kills. But she stood there, in the forbidden red, a living contradiction to everything he'd been taught. She was danger in human form, and yet he couldn't look away. He took another step. She didn't move. He reached for her face, stopped halfway, fingers trembling in the air. Bensad. Between them, the rain outside grew louder, the world beyond their walls vanishing in the storm. "You think I'm the monster," he said, his tone breaking at the edges, "but you're the one who wakes it." Her eyes shimmered with something between defiance and fear. "Then maybe it's time you stop hiding behind it." He exhaled sharply, like the breath had been ripped from him. His hand hovered close to her cheek now, close enough to feel the heat of her skin. Every part of him ached to close the distance, to prove that he was still capable of being something more than cold command and empty control. He wanted to touch her, to silence every question she had ever asked with something that wasn't cruelty or power, but something dangerously close to tenderness. "Don't," she whispered. "I can't," he said. The thunder rolled again, the air tightened. The storm outside raged as if the world itself mirrored their restraint. He could smell her perfume, something soft, like jasmine and rebellion, and it undid him completely. He stepped closer still, the last thread of distance snapping between them. His breath trembled against her skin. His voice was hoarse, unsteady. "You shouldn't have sent it," he murmured. "You shouldn't have reminded me what you are." "And what am I?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes burning with everything he had tried to bury. "Mine," he said. The word hung between them, claim and confession, both a wound and a vow. But before she could answer, the world shattered. The first crack of gunfire tore through the night, slicing the silence apart. The windows exploded inward, glass raining down like ice. Alara screamed as Valerio lunged forward, grabbing her, pulling her down against his chest. The walls shook with the rattle of machine guns, the storm outside swallowed by a greater violence. His body moved before his mind did, pure instinct, pure protection. He wrapped himself around her as bullets chewed through the walls, marble splintering, curtains catching fire. The roar of engines filled the courtyard below, men shouting in Italian, gunfire, echoing like thunder. Ilara's breath came in ragged gasps against his shirt. "Valerio!" "Stay down," he growled, his voice a command born of blood and battle. Glass glittered across the floor like shattered stars. Somewhere beyond the chaos, alarms blared. He reached for his gun, but never let go of her. The firing stopped as suddenly as it began. Smoke curled through the broken windows, the night reeking of gasoline and rain. Valerio rose slowly, scanning the ruins of their room. His men were shouting below, but his eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. And then, through the fractured glass, a single red laser dot slid across his chest. He smiled, cold, ruthless. "They've come for me," he whispered. But when he looked down, the light wasn't on him anymore. It was on her. The world shattered in a single breath. One moment, silence. The next, a symphony of destruction. Glass rained like diamonds in death, slicing through the air as bullets tore the night apart. Ilara didn't scream. The sound was stolen from her throat, replaced by the deafening percussion of chaos. The windows imploded inward, shards glittering in the dim chandeliers as if the house itself had decided to bleed. Valerio moved faster than thought. 1 second, he was a man. The next, a weapon made of instinct and fury. His arms wrapped around her, crushing her against the marble floor, his body covering hers like a shield carved from iron. The air shook with the violence of gunfire. The scent of gunpowder filled her lungs. Sharp, metallic, terrifyingly alive. She felt his heartbeat against her back, pounding like war drums. He didn't speak, only moved, precise, ruthless, every motion a promise. She heard the slide of his gun, the snap of a new magazine. She hadn't seen him fight before. She'd seen him cold, silent, cruel. But never this, never the storm he truly was. He rose halfway, his eyes blazing with something between murder and desperation. "Stay down," he growled, voice breaking the air like thunder. And then he turned, firing toward the broken windows. Every bullet he sent was an oath. Every flash of the muzzle was defiance. His men came running from the hallways, dark suits, drawn guns, shouting orders. But the dawn was already there, commanding the chaos, standing between the enemy and the woman they had dared to touch. Ilara's fingers trembled as she pressed against the floor, the cold marble streaked with dust and blood. She wanted to look away from the violence, but she couldn't. Her gaze clung to him, the man who had ignored her for months, now fighting like a beast reborn to keep her breathing. A bullet ricocheted off the chandelier, sparks scattering like fireflies. Another shattered a vase near her head, the porcelain bursting apart like a scream. Valerio turned back, saw the cut on her cheek from the flying glass, and something inside him snapped. His voice roared through the mansion, "Cover the perimeter, seal the gates." The men obeyed instantly. He was the ghost again, the predator who had turned the underworld into his chessboard. But when his eyes fell on Ilara, that coldness cracked. He grabbed her arm, pulled her up roughly, but not unkindly, holding her close as the walls around them trembled with gunfire. "We move now," he said, and she could hear it. The tremor in his tone, the fear he'd never admit. The storm outside didn't stop. It screamed through the corridors, a hurricane of vengeance. He led her through the smoke-filled hallways, down a hidden corridor she'd never noticed before, his hand never leaving her. The heat of his body seared through her dress, grounding her in a nightmare that felt too real. Behind a panel in the wall, he pressed his palm against a hidden scanner. The panel slid open with a hiss, revealing a narrow passageway lined with steel. "Go," he ordered, pushing her ahead. She stumbled, breath shaking, the sound of her heels echoing like gunshots on the floor. He followed, sealing the panel behind them, the no-soul eyes of the attack dulled, replaced by the mechanical hum of underground ventilation. The tunnel sloped downward, lit by a faint red glow. It smelled of metal, damp earth, and secrecy. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Somewhere safe," he muttered, "if safety still exists." His voice was gravel, raw and unguarded. For the first time she heard exhaustion beneath the steel. He guided her down another corridor, past steel doors and surveillance screens showing flickers of the chaos above, men running, muzzle flashes, the estate bleeding under siege. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the gunfire. "Who are they?" she asked, barely breathing. "Who would dare?" "Everyone dares when they smell weakness," he said darkly, and I showed them mine. His eyes met hers briefly, and in that flash she understood. He meant her. She was his weakness, the one thing that made him human enough to kill for. They reached the end of the tunnel where a heavy door waited, thick steel, bolted, secured by code and biometric lock. He pressed his hand again. The door groaned open. Inside was a small room, walls of reinforced concrete, stocked with supplies, monitors, weapons. The panic room. It wasn't a room meant for comfort. It was a cage meant to outlast hell. Valerio entered last, slamming the door shut. Silence fell like a curtain. Only their breathing remained. He moved to the control panel, flicked through camera feeds, bodies on the lawn, headlights cutting through the dark, men taking cover behind cars. The war wasn't over, but here, for one fragile moment, time seemed to stop. Ilara pressed her back to the cold wall, clutching her trembling hands. Her reflection flickered faintly on the steel, pale skin dusted with blood, wide eyes filled with something she couldn't name. Fear, yes, but also something else, something that burned hotter than fear. Valerio turned toward her, the fire in his eyes hadn't gone out. His shirt was torn, smeared with blood that wasn't all his. His knuckles were bruised, his jaw clenched so hard she could see the pulse hammering in it, and yet Even drenched in violence, there was something heartbreakingly human in him. He looked at her like he was trying to memorize her, like every breath she took was the only sound keeping him sane. "You're hurt," he said finally. His voice was rough, uncertain. "It's nothing," she whispered, though her cheeks still bled. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his fingers brushing her face. The touch was too gentle for the man who had just torn through a battlefield. He wiped the blood away, eyes tracing her skin as if afraid she'd vanish. "You shouldn't have sent that photo," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have made me see you like that." "Why?" she whispered. "Because now I can't stop." His confession wasn't loud, but it hit her harder than the explosion. He stepped back, pacing like a caged animal, running a hand through his hair. "They'll use you against me. You understand that?" "You've already used me against yourself," she said softly, the courage surprising even her. He froze. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick, charged, trembling with everything unsaid. Then a faint sound broke through the silence, a low beep from the security screen. Valerio turned sharply. The monitor showed movement near the back entrance. Another wave of attackers. His jaw tightened. "They're not done," he muttered. He grabbed a gun from the wall, checked the magazine, and stood by the door. "Stay here. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Valerio," I said, "stay." His voice cracked on the word. She could see the fracture beneath the command. He turned to leave, but her hand caught his wrist, small, trembling, yet firm. "Don't die out there," she said, the words barely a breath. He looked down at her hand on his, the blood on his skin staining hers. "I don't plan to," he said. "I just need them to understand what happens when they touch what's mine." He slipped free, the sun, door closing behind him with a heavy thud. The room dimmed, the monitors flickering with scenes of violence. Elara sank to the floor, her hands shaking, heart caught between horror and something dangerously close to longing. She didn't know what terrified her more, the bullets outside or the man fighting them for her. Minutes bled into hours. The gunfire faded, replaced by the whisper of sirens in the distance. The monitors glowed softly in the dark, painting her face in cold light. And then, footsteps, slow, steady, approaching the door. Her pulse quickened. The locks clicked. The door opened. Valerio stepped inside, covered in blood and dust, but alive. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time since their wedding night. His chest rose and fell like a man on the edge of breaking. He crossed the room in silence, crouched beside her, and took her hand. The blood on his palm was still warm, thick between their fingers. "You'll stay with me," he said, his voice low, unyielding. "No one takes you from me again." Elara stared at their joined hands, his blood marking her skin. And for the first time, she wasn't sure whether he was saving her from the world or binding her to it forever. The air in the safe room hung thick with silence and iron, the scent of blood and steel mingling in a fragile peace that could break with a single breath. Elara hadn't moved since Valerio's hand gripped hers, his blood painting her palm in a promise too heavy to wash away. The hum of the ventilation filled the room, low and steady, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Valerio sat across from her now, his back to the wall, shirt torn and skin streaked with crimson. The storm outside had gone quiet, but the one inside him raged on. He stared at the floor, eyes distant, jaw tight, and for a moment he looked less like a Don and more like a man trying to remember how to breathe. Elara watched him in that stillness, the distance between them as sharp as glass. She could feel the weight of his restraint in every second that passed, the blood drying on their joined. Hands had turned dark, sticky, like the secret that bound them together. Finally, he spoke, his voice raw, low, broken at the edges. "You shouldn't have seen me like this." She didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't tear open something deeper. "I tried," he went on, eyes still fixed on the floor. "I tried to keep you untouched by this world. That's why I kept my distance. You think I ignored you? But I didn't. I saw everything." Her breath hitched, and he lifted his gaze. Those eyes, cold, precise, and haunted, locked onto hers. "Every night," he said quietly, "when you thought you were alone, I stood by the door. When you cried, I was there in the shadows. I couldn't come closer. I couldn't touch you." His confession rolled through the air like thunder before the rain. Alara blinked, the words cutting through her chest in ways she couldn't name. "Why?" she asked, almost a whisper. He laughed once, hollow and tired, running a blood-stained hand through his hair. "Because in my family, love is the first thing they teach you to bury. My father used to say, 'A Rossi who loves dies by it.' He made sure I learned that lesson before I could even spell my own name." His voice cracked, the truth leaking through the armor he'd built around himself. "I watched him break my mother for loving him. I swore I'd never make anyone live through that." He looked at her then, really looked. "And then I saw you." Alara felt something ache in her throat. "You thought love would destroy me?" "No." His voice dropped lower, a whisper edged with fear. "I knew it would destroy me, and everything I've built would burn with it." The lights flickered overhead, casting their faces in ghostly flashes. For the first time, she saw him, not as the ghost, the untouchable dawn who could erase men with a single word, but as a man who had been bleeding long before this night, the Sile, and between them pulsed with unspoken things. Her heart trembled with a mix of pity and something more dangerous, understanding. He turned away, elbows on his knees, head bowed. "I don't know what to do with this," he murmured. "With you." Alara rose slowly from the floor, her movements small but sure. Her bare feet whispered against the cold concrete as she crossed the space between them. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat coming off his skin. "Then stop thinking," she said softly, "and start feeling." He looked up. The exhaustion in his eyes was vast, oceans of guilt and longing swirling behind the mask. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his cheek. The gesture was simple, yet it felt like defiance against an empire of fear. His breath caught, his lashes lowering as if her touch burned. "You don't know what you're asking," he whispered. "If I let myself, then die loving me," she said. The words came out like a prayer and a challenge all at once. For a moment, he couldn't move. The muscles in his jaw flexed, the storm in his chest surging against the dam he'd built for years. He caught her wrist gently, his thumb tracing the pulse there, as if grounding himself on the proof that she was real. His voice turned rough, nearly breaking. "You think love can survive in this house?" "It has to," she said. "Or there's nothing left to survive for." The silence that followed was alive, full of the thousand things neither dared to say. His hand slipped from her wrist to her waist, hesitant, unsure, as though every inch he closed between them was a betrayal of everything he'd been taught. His forehead rested against hers, their breaths mingling in the dim light. "You don't understand what I've done to keep you safe," he murmured. "You don't understand how many ghosts I've buried for you." "Then stop hiding behind them," she speared back. The air around them felt electric, trembling with the weight of every suppressed emotion. He closed his eyes, exhaling a shudder that seemed to tear him in half. "Alara," he breathed. Her name a plea, a confession, a curse. His hand trembled against her jaw. "If I touch you, I won't stop." "Then don't," she said, her voice steady despite the quake inside her. For a heartbeat, the distance between them ceased to exist. The air was full of something that could have been a beginning, or a ruin. And then, just as his lips brushed the air between them, the world shattered again. A shrill, violent alarm screamed through the room. Red lights exploded along the ceiling, bathing them both in a pulse of danger. Valerio froze, his entire body going rigid. "What is that?" Alara asked, panic tightening her voice. He turned toward the control panel, eyes wide. The monitors flickered, cameras across the estate flashing warnings, motion sensors triggered. A code scrolled across the bottom of the main screen. "Access override. Silas Rossi." Valerio's expression turned to stone. "No," he whispered. The sound of boots echoed faintly from somewhere above, rhythmic, organized, deliberate. the kind of sound made by men who came not to visit, but to conquer. Ilara's pulse spiked. Who? My father, Valerio said, the words sharp enough to cut. His voice was cold again, but beneath it was something else. Dread. He's here. The red lights flashed faster now, washing their faces in blood-colored glow. The camera feeds showed black-suited figures flooding the halls, moving with military precision. At the front of the line, a silver-haired man in a tailored coat walked like a king entering his fallen son's kingdom. Silas Rossi, the legend, the monster, the patriarch who had built an empire on bones and fear. His face appeared on one of the monitors, sharp features, expression unreadable, eyes full of calculation and disgust. He was speaking to someone off-screen, but the audio was cut. Valerio's hands clenched at his sides, veins rising like lightning beneath his skin. He found the tunnel, he said, voice hollow. He's coming here. Ilara backed up, her heart in her throat. What does he want? To remind me, Valerio said, who owns my soul? The door behind them rattled, once, twice, then fell silent. The alarm still screamed. The lights pulsed like a heartbeat. Ilara's gaze flicked to Valerio. His eyes were no longer just haunted. They were burning. A shadow moved on the other side of the reinforced door, and then a familiar low voice echoed through the intercom, calm and venomous. Open the door, Valerio, Silas Rossi said, or I'll burn her out. The sound of the alarm still echoed in the steel belly of the panic room when the doors hissed open and light poured in like judgment. The Rossi patriarch stepped through, tall, silver-haired, a shadow cut from the same iron as his son, but colder, older, sharpened by years of empire and war. Silas Rossi moved with the calm of a man who believed the world still bent to his word. Behind him, his guards fanned out like vultures in expensive suits, their boots pressing on glass and blood. Valerio stood in front of Ilara, breathing hard, the flickering red lights painting his face in shades of fury. The moment his father's gaze fell on him, something ancient and cruel awakened between them, a quiet hatred inherited and nurtured by silence. You bring shame into this house, Silas said, voice steady, a venom that needed no volume. You hide a woman behind walls and call it love? She is the disease you were meant to cure, not keep. His words hit the air like gunfire, and before anyone could move, his hand cracked across Valerio's face. The sound echoed, a brutal punctuation to years of control and disappointment. Ilara gasped, stepping forward, but Valerio didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, blood forming at the corner of his mouth. For years he had obeyed that voice, knelt to it, built Tita's empire under its cold watch. But now, under the trembling light, he was no longer the obedient heir. He was the ghost who'd found something to live for. Silas turned his wrath toward Ilara then, his gaze dissecting her as though she were a weapon forged against him. You have no place here, girl. You think this house, this name, this man belongs to you? You are a distraction in a war you cannot understand. His tone was almost sorrowful, not for her, but for what he thought his son had become. Ilara lifted her chin, her voice trembling but clear. Maybe I don't understand your war, but I understand your son better than you ever will. The words sliced through the heavy air, leaving even the guards uncertain whether to breathe. Valerio's eyes flicked toward her, pride and terror woven together. Silas gave a bitter smile, as though watching a child speak of fire without knowing its burn. You think he's capable of love? He watched you through walls, through cameras. He learned that from me. You only see what I built, not what he is. The revelation struck Ilara like ice, but she stood her ground. The truth didn't shatter her. It reshaped her understanding of him. Valerio's fists clenched at his sides, his chest rising in jagged breaths. Enough, he said, voice low but shaking with the weight of everything he'd buried. You built this family on fear. You turned me into something unrecognizable, but not anymore. Silas stepped closer, nose to nose with his son, the air thick with the scent of blood and betrayal. "You think love will save you?" he hissed. "Love is weakness. Love is what gets men like us killed." Valerio's laugh was hollow, the sound of a man finally breaking through the glass cage of his life. "Then let me die human, not your monster." His voice cracked like thunder against stone, and for a moment, even the guards hesitated. The air pulsed between father and son, power meeting defiance, history meeting revolt. Silas's expression hardened. "You're not my son anymore," he said quietly. "You're a liability." He raised his hand, gesturing to his men. "Take the girl. She'll be safe until he remembers where he belongs." The guards moved forward, their steps echoing against the cold floor. Alara backed away, pressing against the wall as Valerio stepped in front of her, shielding her like he always did. The ghost turned shield, the sun turned threat. Silas's eyes softened for a single moment, pity, or perhaps nostalgia, then steeled again. "Move aside, Valerio." "No." His voice was calm, deadly calm, the kind that comes when a man has already decided what he'll lose. The guards paused, uncertain. Silas sighed, lowering his hand. "You disappoint me." "I was never trying to please you," Valerio whispered. The flickering red light reflected in his eyes like embers waiting for wind. He reached inside his coat. The guards stiffened. Alara's breath caught. Silence filled the room, thick as smoke, broken only by the faint hum of the security systems rebooting. Then the sound of metal sliding free, soft, precise, final. Valerio raised his gun, not at the guards, not at the walls, but at his own father. The click of the safety echoed like a death sentence. The air held its breath. Valerio's finger hovered over the trigger, his jaw locked, his eyes burning with the fury of every year he had been his father's puppet. Silas stood across from him, still, unreadable, a man who had faced death so many times it had learned to fear him. The guards waited for the first sound, for permission to move, for the spark that would ignite blood. Then came the noise, one heartbeat too soon, the metallic click of a safety being released, and the room erupted. Gunfire split the silence, thunder shattering marble, glass raining down like sharp tears. Alara screamed his name, diving behind the overturned table as bullets carved fire through the air. Valerio moved like a phantom, a storm of precision and rage, his body shielding hers. Even as he fired back, the scent of gunpowder mingled with blood and smoke, choking the air until every breath felt like drowning in fire. Silas moved with terrifying calm, each shot deliberate. Each step forward, a sermon of dominance. "You can't kill me, boy," he shouted through the chaos, his voice deep, cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "Even if you pull the trigger, you'll never escape what I made you." Valerio's response was another burst of bullets, tearing through the portraits that lined the walls, ancestors and ghosts watching their lineage destroy itself. A mirror shattered behind Alara, raining shards across her hair, her reflection breaking into 1,000 frightened pieces. Her hands trembled, reaching for something, anything, until they closed around cold metal. A fallen gun. It felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the weight of every sin in this cursed house. She looked at Valerio, his body a blur of motion, his face streaked with blood and light. He had once been untouchable, the ghost who ruled from shadows, and now he was breaking open before her, bleeding and furious and human. "Stay down," he shouted, but she didn't. Something inside her, something fierce and long silenced, rose like fire through her veins. She stood, her heart pounding so loudly she couldn't hear the bullets anymore. Her vision tunneled. Silas, calm and monstrous, raising his gun toward Valerio. Without thinking, she pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the hall like a scream. Silas staggered, shock flickering across his face as his hand went to his shoulder. His gun clattered to the floor. Time froze, the sound of the world folding in on itself. Alara stared at her hands, the smoking weapon trembling in them. Valerio turned, disbelief flooding his features, not at her aim, but at the truth that she had done it for him. The chaos fell into silence. The last echoes of violence faded, replaced by the low hum of flames eating through the curtains. Valerio lowered his weapon slowly, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on his father. Whoa. Oh, now leaned against the wall, blood spreading like a crimson bloom across his tailored suit. You shouldn't have done that, Silas rasped, his voice a whisper of menace, not pain. Valerio stepped forward, gun still in hand, ready to end it, but Alara caught his wrist. No more, she breathed. You said love makes you human. Don't prove him right by killing it. Her voice trembled, soft yet unyielding, the kind of strength born from despair. Valerio froze, eyes flicking from her to his father. Silas smiled, that cruel, knowing smirk that carried lifetimes of manipulation. Listen to her, he murmured, his voice like smoke. She's already my greatest creation. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor, the remaining guards retreating, dragging the wounded patriarch with them. Valerio didn't chase. He stood in the center of destruction, his heart torn between vengeance and the woman who had just saved him. Alara's hands were still shaking as she dropped the gun, the metal clattering against marble. The mansion smelled of burnt silk and iron, a requiem for the ghosts it held. Valerio reached for her, his touch hesitant, trembling. You shouldn't have done that, he said again, but his voice broke this time, softer, not anger, but fear. You don't know what you've started. She looked up at him, eyes wide, glistening. I know what I ended. The storm outside cracked lightning across the night, illuminating the ruin they stood in. For a long moment, neither moved. The fire from the broken lamps painted their faces in gold and red, reflections of a love born in violence and stitched in guilt. Then Alara noticed something. A small piece of paper, folded and damp, half hidden beneath the shattered glass. She bent down, fingers brushing it open. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, the ink smudged, but legible. Her heart went still as she read the word. Aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. You are his weakness, the note said, signed in Silas's unmistakable hand, and I know how to break him. The mansion that had once held its breath for silence now breathed with the sound of war being born. Every hall smelled of oil and steel, the weight of death already hanging in the air before the first bullet had even been chambered. Valerio Rossi moved through his own house like a ghost sharpening itself into a weapon. The walls were lined with crates of ammunition and black duffel bags of cash, the kind of preparation that meant there would be no surrender. He ordered the evacuation without emotion, his voice steady even as his mother clutched his sleeve with shaking fingers. Isabella's eyes, the same gray as her son's, pleaded for a mercy she knew he didn't possess. Lorenzo tried to argue, tried to stay, but Valerio's tone cut him down with the authority of a man who had made peace with his own death. Take her, he said, not looking at either of them, and don't look back. When the door closed behind them, the silence that followed was not peace. It was a countdown. Alara stood in that silence, her red dress replaced by black. Her hair was unbound, her eyes raw from sleepless nights, her heart stripped of illusion. She had begged him once to see her. Now he couldn't look away. You think I can let you stay here? He said, turning on her with the kind of fury born from fear. You think I can fight them and worry every second that you're in their sights? But Alara stepped closer, her voice quiet and steady. You wanted to protect me by staying away. Now I protect you by staying close. The words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. Valerio's jaw clenched, a vein ticking in his temple, the weight of everything unsaid pulsing between them. She reached for his hand, found it trembling, not from fear, but from everything he was trying not to feel. He kissed her knuckles like a vow. Then he loaded his gun. The night turned red before it turned black. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, drumming over the tension like a warning. Valerio's men took positions along the balconies and staircases. The chandeliers swayed with the vibration of movement. Somewhere deep within the house, the generator groaned to life, throwing shadows that made the walls look alive. Alara stayed close, her hands steady even as her pulse betrayed her. Valerio taught her how to reload the weapon, how to keep her back to the wall, how to breathe through the terror. He looked at her once, and in that moment, the war was not outside, it was in his chest. "If anything happens," he began, but she cut him off. "Then we fall together." There was no room left for arguments. There was only the sound of engines in the distance, headlights cutting through the fog, and the low hum of an empire ready to bleed. When the first shots came, they shattered more than glass. The front doors burst inward, men in black masks pouring in like shadows made of fury. Valerio moved with terrifying precision, each shot a confession written in gunfire. Alara covered him, the recoil jarring through her bones, her fear drowned out by adrenaline and love that had nowhere else to go. Smoke filled the hallways. The marble floors ran slick with rain and blood. Valerio was everywhere, shouting orders, dragging her behind cover, killing anything that moved too close. At one point she saw him stumble, blood painting his sleeve, but he didn't stop. He turned his rage into rhythm, his protection into violence, and still, between the chaos, he looked at her, as if to remind himself she was real, as if her existence was the only thing tethering him to the world. The battle lasted forever and no time at all. When the last echo of gunfire faded, Valerio's breath came ragged and hoarse. The mansion was smoke and ruin, the chandeliers nothing but melted glass. He searched for Alara through the haze, shouting her name, his voice cracking with panic for the first time in his life. Then he saw her, kneeling near the grand staircase, eyes wide, hands trembling, alive. He dropped his weapon and crossed to her, falling to his knees, cupping her face with blood-stained fingers. "It's over," he whispered, "but the universe has no mercy for men like Valerio Rossi." A sudden thud echoed from behind the smoke. A shadow moved too fast. Before he could turn, before she could speak, rough hands seized her from behind. A black cloth, a scream, the echo of boots retreating into the storm. Valerio lunged forward, his voice breaking the night in two. The front door swung open, swallowed by rain and headlights. Alara's scream faded into the distance as the van disappeared into the darkness. Valerio, soaked in blood and rain, fell to his knees in the wreckage of his home, whispering her name into the silence that swallowed everything he had left. The city was bleeding when Valerio Rossi stepped into the night. The streets of his kingdom burned behind him, their flames reflected in the wet pavement like veins of molten gold. His men had scattered, his empire had fallen to silence. All that remained was her name, echoing in his head like a gunshot that refused to fade. Alara. Every breath was a war cry. Every turn of the wheel was a prayer. The black car tore through the rain-drenched roads of Milan, the roar of its engine drowning out the sirens that wailed for other sins, other men. He didn't notice the blood dripping from his sleeve or the gash on his cheek. He didn't care that the world saw him as a monster. Monsters didn't weep, but his eyes burned like fire. The city he once ruled now looked like a graveyard, and he was driving through it to find the only heartbeat that still mattered. Inside a crumbling warehouse by the docks, the night waited. The metal walls groaned with wind, the smell of salt and gasoline thick enough to choke on. Silas Rossi stood in the center, calm as a man awaiting his own coronation, his gun pressed cold and steady against Alara's temple. She was bound to a chair, her hair tangled, that her face streaked with tears that caught the dim light like shards of glass. Yet her gaze, oh, her gaze, did not flinch. She looked at Valerio as if he'd already won. That was what destroyed him, not her fear, her faith. Valerio stepped out of the shadows, his coat soaked through, his gun raised and steady. "You win, father," he said, voice hollow, each word dragged from somewhere deep inside. "But she walks out alive." Silas smiled, the cruel, elegant smile of a man who had never lost control in his life. "Alive?" he echoed softly. "You think this is about her life? No, figlio mio. This is about yours." He gestured to the chaos beyond the walls. "You've already burned your name for this woman. You've killed your blood. What do you think is left of you now?" Valerio's breath came slow and sharp. Whatever's left belongs to her. He dropped his gun. It hit the concrete with a sound that broke the air like thunder. Silas's eyes glinted. Then you've already died. A single heartbeat passed. Then, steel flashed, but not from Silas. Alara's hands, slick with her own blood, rose from behind the chair. Somehow, she'd freed herself from the ropes. Her fingers gripped a small pistol, Valerio's backup, the one he'd hidden in the seam of her dress weeks ago. The sound that followed wasn't a scream, it was a decision. The gunshot cracked through the warehouse, a jagged sound that tore history in half. Silas staggered, his eyes wide with disbelief. His own blood spread across his shirt like an ink stain blooming on silk. He fell backward, the echo of his body hitting the ground, swallowed by the storm outside. For a moment, there was only silence. Alara sat trembling, the gun still shaking in her hand. Valerio crossed the floor in 3 steps, ripped the weapon from her grip, and pulled her against him. She gasped, then broke apart in his arms, sobbing into his chest, his heart bombed against her ear like a drum, wild and alive. "It's over," he whispered, but neither of them believed it yet. He looked down at his father's body and felt nothing, no victory, no sorrow, just release. The ghost of a boy his father once shaped had finally died there beside the man. When dawn came, it was not gentle. The city burned quietly under the gray sky, smoke curling over rooftops like whispers of old sins. The Rossi Empire was nothing but ashes. But in a small villa miles away, hidden beyond the vineyards and the fog, a light glowed in a window. Inside, Alara sat by the fire, wrapped in one of Valerio's shirts, her fingers tracing the scar that cut across his knuckles. He watched her the way a starving man watches the first sunrise he's survived to see. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Valerio took her hand and kissed it, his voice low, almost a prayer. "From now on," he said, "there's only us, no ghosts, no crowns, just you and me." Outside, the city still burned, but in that quiet home, away from power, away from blood, away from the ghosts that had ruled them both, their love, forged in fire and ruin, endured. Beyond the hills, a black car rolled through the smoke, its headlights cutting the dawn. Inside, a familiar ring gleamed on a man's hand. Silas Rossi's ring, a blood-stained hand. The wheel turned, and the city whispered that the dead do not always stay buried.